Before I take this over to my machine, I have to decide on the foot, the thread, and the overall quilting plan. Since I'm quilting with straight line stitching, I'm using my walking foot. A walking foot helps to feed the fabric layers through my machine so it won't bunch up on the back. Most machines do not come with this attachment, so you'd have to buy one. It's a good investment if you plan on making more quilts. For this size quilt, you could use your regular foot if you're careful when moving your fabric through the machine. Having your pin basting at least 3 inches apart helps to keep these layers from shifting. You have many thread choices. I usually go with matching thread so my stitches blend into the background. A contrasting thread, like this red, will show off my stitching. I usually don't want my stitching to stand out as my machine quilting is not always perfect. The matching thread tends to hide my mistakes. It's best to use 100% cotton thread, but it's okay to use cotton covered polyester, or I admit sometimes I use 100% polyester. You want to avoid thread that is labeled quilting thread. This is for hand quilting. It's thicker than regular thread and will mess up your machine if you use it in the bobbin. Quilting thread should not be confused with thread that is labeled machine quilting thread. Machine quilting thread is okay to use in your machine. Machine quilting takes up a lot of thread, so I've wound 2 bobbins. This color matches the backing fabric, but that choice is up to you. Having this printed background also helps to hide mistakes. I like to plan the order of my stitching before I go to the machine. I want to start in the center and work my way out to the sides. So on this quilt, I'll start on one of these rows. I'll go around and sew the fingers down on each one of the hands, just in case my fusible doesn't hold. This also helps to keep the rows in place. So instead of starting on the edge here, I'll probably start somewhere off to the side, maybe where you won't notice, and I'll stitch all the way around, and then I'll come back, ending here. After I complete this row, I'll change my thread and go on to the next row until I've completed the whole tree. The crosshatch design on the background will be completed last. I've attached my walking foot and I'm ready to go. I'll use a larger stitch length like the one used for top stitching. On this machine, that's somewhere between a stitch length of 3 and 4. I've also set my needle up, needle down feature so my needle remains down when I stop stitching. If you don't have this feature, try to remember to position your needle to stay in the quilt, like this, when you stop stitching. You also might want to prepare a little quilt like this to try out your stitches before committing to the larger project. The stitching on the left is too tight. The stitching on the right looks just right. Since I'm starting in the center, I've rolled my quilt to make it easier to handle. Sometimes this roll gets in the way and I have to unroll and then re-roll. Other times I just leave the quilt kind of fluffed as I maneuver it through the machine. What's most important is to make sure you have an area that's flat and smooth. This makes it easy for you to see where you're going, and it also helps to keep these layers from shifting as you sew. Notice how I've put my hands out to frame the area where I'm about ready to stitch. This also helps to keep those layers from shifting. So now I'm ready to begin. I want to make sure that I've pulled up my bobbin thread, so I take one stitch and I'm going to pull that. Let me pull this out so you can see what I'm doing. I'm pulling that out. I want the bobbin thread up on top when I start, because when it's on the back it gets all tangled up sometimes and it doesn't look very nice. So put my pressure foot down and I'm going to take a couple stitches and lock it, and then I'm going to continue quilting. Now you'll notice that the safety pin's in the way, so I'm going to take that safety pin out. And since I have needle down, I can maneuver this around. That needle down holds my quilt in place. And I'm just going to stitch. Let's see. Let's switch this, come back down. You see, it's not easy to maneuver in here. That's why folding this off to the side helps. It's also not easy with the camera right next to you. So I'm going to come around, I'm going to stitch on the edge, and once again my needle staying down so that this doesn't get slipped, or the quilt doesn't slip out from underneath. And I'm just following that edge all the way around. Now I notice that this roll is starting to get in the way here, so I'm going to unroll some of it to allow me to sort of fluff it up to make it easier to quilt around this corner here. So I'm going to continue stitching like this all the way around the hands. I'll follow this edge all the way till I get to my starting point. When I've stitched all the way around the hands in this row, I lock my stitches and I'm ready to go on to the next row. Sometimes some of the fingers will start coming up like this. Don't worry, just keep an eye on it and make sure that you stitch that back down. After I've stitched around the hands, I'm ready for this background. I want to start stitching from the center out to the edge. The bobbin thread has been pulled up and I'm ready to stitch. So I'm going to lock my stitches in place by moving forward and then backwards. And I'll stitch this line to the edge. Notice where my hands are. My hands are smoothing this fabric as I stitch. I'll continue in this manner until I fill in all the background.